brought us closer to 583,000. So we had a lot of money that we weren't expecting. That's now reflected in this actual budget, which is why in the change 2026 to 2027 column, you see increases for almost every single organization. We're not going over budget, we're just using the remaining revenue that we hadn't been allocated, that we didn't allocate for this year. You'll also see some new reserves allocations. We've got a reserves allocation for the class gift of 2030, a reserves allocation for emergency repairs designated for Wildcat Esports, and a reserves allocation for emergency repairs dedicated for Wildcat Media. The class gift of 2030 was added because now the incoming first-year class will have the ability to start planning their class gift from the first day they set foot on campus and over the next 4 years. It means that money is there, right? They can start planning, they can start working on it. It won't actually be used until they graduate in 2030, but it will allow that process to sort of start going. For emergency repairs, esports and media both have a lot of very expensive equipment. Sometimes that equipment breaks, sometimes it doesn't. And we don't have a budget large enough where we can just give them thousands of dollars for equipment on a, well, maybe it'll break, maybe it won't. Some things they can plan to replace, they can plan to upgrade, but these two allocations are really just meant for if an arena PC breaks, it needs to be replaced. That can be done without esports having to eat away at their budget or move money around internally. The same thing with media. Each of those cameras are thousands of dollars. If one of them breaks and has to be replaced, then this allows for that to happen, even though it doesn't necessarily, even though it wouldn't come out of their internal year-to-year budget. The specifics of these reserves allocations are outlined above in the resolution where it has the allocation stipulations. If you have any questions on those, please feel free to ask. The reserves, these are estimations. I do want to make some amendments if the Senate will entertain. I'd like to entertain a motion to modify under the summary of allocation to add a new branch labeled reserves allocation, outdoor recreational area space, with allocated 2025 to 2026 set at 0, change for 2026 to 2027 set at 85,000, and proposed for 2026-2027 also set at 85,000, and update all the numbers that sort of fall down, as well as insert it within the general reserves branch for the beginning 2026 to 2027 column. I'd be happy to restate that if need be.
So moved by, we're going to choose Senator Fisher. Do I have a second? Second by Pro Temp Lid 1. Okay, going to discussion on the amendment to the allocation, adding the new reserves allocation, and I would like that sent out as an email, but is there any discussion for this? Senator Beckman.
We are going to have too much money in our reserves to be allowed by SUNY to be collecting student activities fees. So we need to spend some money. And we feel campus improvement, especially outdoor campus improvement, is a very, very good way to spend it. Currently, not a whole lot of stuff to do outside on our campus, so we want to improve that. I yield.
All right. Yeah. Wildcat Media.
Body would be in charge of deciding where these funds go? Would that be a committee? Would that be the exec board? I yield to the treasurer.
All right. Is there any? Chief Justice Wu.
So would this go to things like increasing the disc golf course and outdoor volleyball nets, like stuff like that? Like, what are we talking about when it comes to outdoor stuff? I yield to Senator Beckman.
So the thing is, it could. That's the point. We want to keep it with the ability to decide where we want it to go. One of the ideas in budget committee we had was make a pickleball court somewhere. We could also, of course, make a better disc golf. You know, it's outdoor activities, so it would go towards that. I yield.
Treasurer Weddle.
Yeah, so I just sent that out. Everybody should have it. As Senator Beckman mentioned earlier, our unrestricted, undesignated reserves have gotten to an amount which exceeds the limit set by SUNY. We don't know, it's not exactly clear what SUNY will do if this happens, but the concern is that they would not allow us to collect new student activity fees, since we would essentially have thousands of student activity fees sitting unused basically in our savings account. By designating it for a specific long-term project, it drops our undesignated reserves, so we're not necessarily spending this $85,000 next year, right? But it just allows us to set it aside for that long-term project. As Senator Beckman also mentioned, one of the ideas that was brought up was a pickleball court. A basketball court was also brought up. The executive board and our advisors have been working with facilities to just kind of plan out an idea of what this would look like, right? One of the main bits that we're looking at would be the establishment of an outdoor recreational area across from Oriskany Hall. There's a lot of space up there that's really just going unused. The parking lot holds a lot of storage containers at the moment, but my understanding is a lot of those are going to be going away once the campus center opens, because they're holding a lot of various things for the campus center. The language is pretty broad on what this can be spent on. As far as who controls the spending is broadly directed by student government, so that's going to be the student government executive board. I would imagine and certainly hope that that'll be in consultation with the Senate, right, and the student body as a whole. They don't have the authority to just spend this money. It does need to follow all of our SUNY policies, and of course this is a large project that'll be occurring on campus, so there's going to be a lot of collaboration with on-campus offices as well. Don't know that this is going to be done next year, to be very frank, but this money will be set aside indefinitely until it's either spent down or returned to reserves. So it could be used for funding the disc golf course. It could be used for funding smaller recreational areas. We could set up a couple tetherball poles around campus. You could really do a lot of things with this fund. The creation of it is really just to solve the problem that our undesignated reserves are too high. We believe, we being the executive board and budget committee, believe that in outdoor recreational areas are needed on campus, and student government could do a lot to help fund them. That's why we're looking to establish this in next year's budget. Like the other restricted reserves allocations, these don't come out of our
I'm going
operating.
to cut you off there. It has
yield.
been about 5 minutes. So just to give other members a chance to kind of provide input, I do think that was a very solid coverage of it all, though. Senator Fisher, you had your hand raised.
Another recommended project for that money, if the outdoor stuff wouldn't work, would maybe be an upgrade to the late night lounge of the student center. I yield.
Pro Tem Ludewan.
A lot to be talking about for our reserves allocation, and I know we discussed it in budget committee. I also saw that you added stipulations to a stipulations document to the motion you sent out. I don't believe it was a part of the motion, though. I could be wrong, to add that into the resolution, because I feel the clarification over the stipulation is needed. I yield to the treasurer.
Yeah, I'd be happy to make another motion, depending on whether or not the original motion passes, for the explicit addition of the stipulations document. That's on me if I forgot to include it in the original entertainment. I just figured I'd send it out there so there's clarity. A lot of that language is copied over from the other restricted reserves allocations. Really the important line is the first one, which just says money is to be spent on the creation, facilitation, or maintenance of outdoor recreation areas around campus, including but not necessarily limited to the creation of an outdoor recreation area across from Oriskany Residence Hall. I yield.
Senator Novak.
So I just to clarify for our, one of our other senators, we can't use the money to upgrade the late night lounge because that project is currently under the jurisdiction of facilities, who is
All right. Wildcat Media.
Distributing this fund, would that be the executive board?
Sure. Treasurer Riddle.
It's broadly outlined as student government, right? Given the student government executive board oversees student government, my interpretation of the stipulations, the intention behind it is that it's the executive board or their designee, because realistically speaking, the executive board is not going to be out there, tearing up blacktop or digging holes, right? Like, we want to create the project, we want to fund the project, but the actual implementation and much of the costs is going to be handled by someone, or the actual purchase of supplies, the actual purchase of services, and all of that is likely going to be handled by facilities, realistically speaking, and then they're going to bill us for it. Similar to the esports arena, which saw a lot of renovations, esports didn't, go through and price out all of those changes. They just said, this is what we want to do. Facilities build them for it, and then esports paid for it. So that's very much how this is envisioned, right? The project would be planned out. I very much hope that committees would be utilized. I think it would be a great resource, as well as surveys and tabling and all sorts of gathering student input on it. But it's really up to the executive board at the end of the day as far as which areas are chosen. Excluding, it does explicitly say, the creation of an outdoor recreation area across from Erskine Residence Hall. But what that looks like exactly is not solidified within this resolution, because it's meant to be broad. It's meant to be open. I yield.
Senator Novak.
This is a question mostly for our advisors, but in case these projects can't be handled by facilities because they're so big or they require a lot of stuff, I don't think facilities has the capability of doing major construction, such as doing concrete or stuff like that. Can the e-board hire out private contractors to build this stuff, especially if we get permission from the president or someone else involved? Or I yield to our advisors.
Yeah, great question. The quote that we got was from an outside contractor, anything that facilities can't do. They do have specific contractors that already have agreements with the SUNY system. Otherwise, you have to go through the whole bid process and all of those things. So certainly SGU would be part of those estimates and companies and all of those things. But there are a lot of guidelines and restrictions on who would get those bids and all of that. So certainly SGU would be part of working with facilities for that. But yeah, great question. I yield. Did I answer that fully? Sorry. Okay, I yield.
All right. Is there any further discussion for the amendment to the summary? Yep. Chief Justice.
This is just a question for I know people were really, really bummed about free ski Fridays this year. Okay, never mind. I yield. No, continue. So, are we sure we want to put all of this for just outdoor stuff when we could put it just a little bit in for that specific event that students really spoke out about? I yield to Webb.
So the issue that came up with free ski this year is, while I probably should have reached out in September at that point, and November still wasn't enough time, the dates that were given back to us didn't work with that place. The budget went up, and we then looked at all the numbers from the previous years and the numbers subsequently with the students that went to the amount we were paying. Wasn't enough evidence that we should continue. Then we did do it this year. We did the one date. Only 55 people showed up, and it was still $2,000+ plus. So if anything, right now it's more of a discussion between the web right now and our advisors to figure out what if we just paid for the rentals, because we can't keep paying for the tickets. It's getting way too expensive.
Aren't we supposed to be doing division of questioning?
We're in a motion of the allocation of $85,000, and this discussion was asking why shouldn't it be reserved for something else, like Free Ski Friday?
I would see that happening, but there's then also a ski club that also has it. So Webb wants to focus on other things rather than free ski. We would still host the date alongside ski club. It's not adding up right now for us. I yield.
Senator Beckman?
Outspoken about the Free Ski Friday. We will address that when it gets time to it, but the point that was made in Budget Committee is that we need to keep a balanced budget. This is, of course, coming from reserves. So bringing it, we don't want a budget that isn't balanced, even if we aren't spending as much money as we want to. We want to make sure it's balanced, and then we pull money from reserves for a project, not necessarily paying for operations. I yield.
Treasurer Weddle?
I want to echo Senator Beckman's point, and I do want to say we have had years in the past where we've had budgets that are over budget by design when our reserves have gotten high. The problem is, given where we are in the year, I don't think there's enough time for an equitable distribution of an over, like, you know, say we decide we're going to have a budget that's over budget by $50,000. We don't have the time to figure out where that $50,000 is going, whether how much is going to web, how much is going to esports, how much is going to SGU, clubs, etc. There's not enough time for Budget Committee to meet again with all of these orgs and discuss their budget requests in light of a reserves increase. I think we're much better off keeping the budgets that were worked through quite extensively. Those in Budget Committee know how long those meetings were. And just kind of establishing some reserves allocations for, as Senator Beckman said, long-term projects to improve the campus. I yield.
Webb?
Comparatively between bowling and Free Ski Friday, bowling went always over 150 and was cheaper than Free Ski Friday. I yield.
Senator Beckman?
For later. You guys did schedule something at a very inopportune time for skiing. Additionally,
all right, I'm going to cut you off. That's
Yeah.
not really relevant. Pro Tem Bludewan?
Question?
We have a motion to call the question. Is there a second? Second by Senator Rose. Going into voting on the call to question. All those in favor of the call to question, please raise your hand. All those opposed and all those who abstain, that passes 9-1-0. Going into now, the discussion has ended for the resolution as posted in the email for the addition of the reserves allocation.
Passing the whole resolution. We're
It
talking
said
about
the amendment of the resolution. Anyways, on the amendment of the resolution, let me say it clearly, of the addition of the reserves allocation as posted in the email. All those in favor of the amendment, please raise your hand. All those opposed and all those who abstain, that passes unanimously. Back in discussion of the summary section of the resolution.
Can we just passed include the stipulations for spending it? I yield.
It was only made to add that line in the summary of allocations
Okay.
and then trickle down through
Okay.
the subsequent parts of the resolution. Treasurer Weddle?
I'd like to entertain a motion to also add within this resolution the stipulations that were sent out over email covering the outdoor recreational area. I yield.
So moved by Senator Beckman, second by Pro Tem Bludewan. Going in discussion of the additional stipulations, is there any discussion? Seeing no discussion, does anyone disapprove unanimous approval? Seeing no disapproval, that passes unanimously. Back in discussion of the summary section of the resolution, is there any further discussion? Treasurer Weddle.
Entertain a motion to, under the reserves section, strike out the class gift of 2027, class gift of 2028, and class gift of 2029. The balance of each of those were transferred to the foundation for growth over the next few years. I yield.
So moved by Pro Tem Bludewan, second by Senator Khan. Going into discussion of the motion to strike out the 3 points under reserves of the class gift allocations. Is there any discussion for this? Senator Novak?
I yield to Treasurer Weddle.
Each of those were transferred to the foundation, so they all have $0 at the moment. It wouldn't be it wouldn't be an accurate budget if they were still listed as 10,000. We don't have that money anymore. I yield.
All right. Is there any further discussion for the motion to strike out those 3 lines under reserves? Seeing no further discussion, we will go into voting. All those in favor of striking out the 3 class gift lines under reserves to 0, just striking them out. All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those opposed, and all those who abstain, that passes 901. All right, back in discussion of the summary page as a whole. Is there any further discussion for the summary? Seeing no further discussion. Senator Beckman.
We did talk about another reserves allocation for class gift. I'd just like to ask our treasurer if we're still doing that, or no, I yield.
Treasurer Whittle.
Yes, so I would still like to do that, but I should say, I'm waiting to receive approval from the board of directors. I'm meeting with them next week, I believe, and we'll discuss it then. And if that's approved, then that'll be added to the budget next week. Thank you. I yield.
All right. Is there any further discussion for the summary page? Seeing none, we'll move on to SGU's portion of the budget. Is there any discussion for SGU's portion of the budget? President Lunahara.
Could I get a little bit of clarification from our treasurer as to why the special projects line have been reduced to nothing?
Treasurer Weddle?
The reason it was zeroed out is now under the 12th financial policy, 12th edition of financial policy, SGU executive can perform a reserves poll on its own. So if it wants to fund any specific project, it can just do so. The reason special projects has fluctuated over the years. It used to at one point be called miscellaneous, and it was pretty much anything that the executive branch wanted to spend money on and they hadn't budgeted for. At one point in time, it had $50,000 in it. Other times, it had $20,000. It was reduced last year because, frankly speaking, the executive board itself should not have a discretionary fund to spend whatever they want on it. The reserves pool, on the other hand, has much more money, and it has to go through a sort of public approval process. It gets voted on by the Senate, discussed by Budget Committee, signed by all sorts of people, whereas if you have just this discretionary fund, the only people that it needs approval from is the advisor and the treasurer. I yield.
I would like to ask a question to the treasurer. Does this mean that this line is now removed, or is this line still active so that a reserves pool can still be put into this line as a special project? Treasurer Weddle?
So yeah, it's still available. Okay, if that answers the question, I yield.
Senator Novak?
Couple of things, but I guess I can just recall it back on. Wait, also I'll go over one now. Just looking at some of the stipends, specifically the senator stipends, currently you have it set to $7,125. If you divide it by 15, that leaves it to $475 per senator, or $237.5 per semester. That's kind of an ugly number. Why didn't you round it to be a whole number, or just round it to be $250 per senator? I yield to Treasurer Weddle.
It's an ugly number. There's all sorts of ugly numbers. The concern was really balancing the budget. We did want to give senators an increase in pay for clarity. Is this an increase? This is a $25 annual increase in the senator stipend per senator. There's 15 senators, right? So any increase to one senator stipend, we reflect across all senator stipends. So it was really it was a $25 increase. That felt like a reasonable number. It gets divided a little ugly, but under the financial policy, the new current financial policy, your stipend might be a little ugly as well because it's prorated based off weeks. So if you work for the full semester, it'll look nice, but if you only work 4 or 6 weeks out of the semester, you might be getting an ugly number anyways. I yield.
All right, Senator Novak?
A second thing is underneath events, we are completely removing DEI programming. This was a big debate with last year's budget also, and I'd like to bring up some of the arguments in favor of not doing that were brought up for last year's budget. One of the big things was brought up was the fact that having money delegated to DEI programming / events ensures that we'll actually have them, because we are not a monocultural institution. We have people from all different types of religions, cultures, even countries of origin. In fact, our Senate, our horseshoe / square already has at least minimum 3 international students from 3 different countries on it. And if we just completely remove that, yes, that doesn't stop the fact that we're going to be using those events, but it decreases the likelihood that we are going to even do those events in the first place. Last semester, one of the arguments was, oh, we use this for the coffee house we were doing for the senators, but that no one used that except for the senators. And already, as an international student, this school does not feel diverse. Yes, there was some cultural, some religious events. I haven't seen a singular one except for Chinese New Year for East Asians. And as somebody who's East Asian, I already feel unrepresentative on this campus. The entire point of this DIY is that we will actually be using it to make events, to make students like me feel welcome and included. Just because we didn't do it this year, that's not a reflection on that this shouldn't exist. That's a reflection that we as a student government failed this semester to make that programming. That does not mean we should get rid of that programming. That just means we need to be better in the future. I yield.
Senator Rose. Sure. I just want to clarify, this is not for or against the points being made. I just want to clarify that the Wellness and Inclusion contract did get updated this year, so they have to host more events than what was previously required. And the only line that they can use is the events line. So just as a general information, not one way or the other. Webb?
I completely agree with your statement. If you look under the description of it, though, it says it's being merged. So I think it's getting rid of the line so it's all in one line. So it's not 2 separate entities in the line, so it's getting merged. So I think it still can be used for DEI funds, if I'm reading this correctly. Yeah, I'm going to yield to Treasurer Weddle.
Yes, and kind of build off what Webb said and what our chair added. Now those events are required, right? They're contractually required now for some of our officers once the contract bill passes. The SGU-sponsored events just allows us to be a lot more broad. The DEI programming line for this year, it wasn't used until the end of March. That was the first time it was used for all of this year, and it was used, out of the 3 times that it's been used this year, 2 of those have been sponsoring other events hosted by other organizations on campus that we were contributing to, which is a great thing to do. But programming, we have a programming board, right? If there's concerns about the number of events that fall under the umbrella of DEI, I really think those should be brought more to the organization that we have in charge of programming. Student government does not have a lot of funding for programming to begin with, right? If there's concerns about the number of events that are considered multicultural, right? Absolutely bring it up to student government, but we don't have a large budget for programming to begin with. That's why it was zeroed out and merged with SGU events, because overall our programming budget saw a decrease this year for activities that are meant for the entirety of the student body. We used to have 2,000 under DEI programming, 1,000 under SGU sponsored events. Now we just have 1,000 all told for both of those combined. The student government executive branch doesn't have a lot of money for programming because we have organizations, subsidiaries, and all sorts of other groups that do programming. This is to provide funding for programming as is contractually required for some of our officers, while still ensuring that the main responsibilities of student government are upheld, and our organizations that provide a lot more activities on campus have the funds that they need to do what they need to do. I yield.
Our advisor.
Yeah, I think that's really loud. Sorry. I think you bring up a lot of good points, but the one thing I will mention is that as Webb's advisor, I always advise them against doing cultural programming, and I say that because it's very difficult for one group to provide programming for every culture, and Webb's job is primarily to be the fun events, right? Something that's inclusive for everybody. I would recommend, if you are struggling to find events or think that there should be more programming on campus for different cultures, to bring it to the multicultural office. In addition, Webb doesn't have a wellness and inclusion committee, but SGU does. I will also mention that it doesn't look like the lines were necessarily merged. It looks like the purpose of them was merged, but the funding of it was not. So it was $1,000, and it's still $1,000, so instead you're just cutting. So I just think it's difficult in that regard to say that they are merged, because they're really not. But I just wanted to bring that up, as Webb doesn't usually do cultural events. I yield.
All right. Just as a point of information on kind of two things. One is the contracts, just to make it clear, that contractual obligation thing, that was updated last semester. That has already passed. So those are in contracts currently. It's not waiting on the contract update. The other thing, too, is that a new catering line was added, and that is the major cost of events, is the catering line. So that's kind of where that money went. We're going to start with Senator Beckman.
Thank you. My hand is getting tired. I would like to add to, this was mainly in response to Priscilla's point of there's not a lot of multicultural events. There are. They run through clubs. Amna ran an amazing event that I loved the food at. Multi-varsity Club is incredibly active. If you want your culture to have a celebration, make it yourself. I would love if there was a Spanish culture club, but I'm not doing it. So someone else is. If you want, Priscilla, Eastern Asian, like a Japanese, I would assume, club, do it. You can get funding. Max will give you funding. And
all right, I'm
so
just
I
going
don't
to give a brief point of
yeah.
order. Just please refer to the Horseshoe members by the title and last name.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry. My point's made. I yield.
Okay. Senator Novak.
I just wanted to say, because I know this is a tiny bit repeating my point, but I'm repeating it for good reason, just because it seems it was misinterpreted. My big thing about them being merged is not that it doesn't allow us to not have those events, because yes, if it's merged, we can still have those events, still use the funding. My problem just is that it leads to the possibility that we won't use the funding at all for those events, because those funding, having a reserve, the reason why we have reserved lines for specific types of events and stuff like that is it makes sure we will have funding for those events. If we merge it into all one line, there is the possibility that other events will take all that funding before another event can then use it. So the purpose of the DI line was to make sure we would have funding when we did those events, and we wouldn't have to worry about it all being taken up by other events. I yield.
Wildcat Media.
In the case of not having anyone hired in the director of wellness and inclusion position, would it then be on the committee to hold those events? Is that, I go back to the chair?
Yeah, sure. To kind of clarify that, the chief of staff is the one who directly oversees. Alternatively, the president is also supposed to fill in on any duties that are not directly delegated. So they can usually delegate them to the chief of staff, considering that they directly oversee. The committee would still be the one that, would be gone to for the event. So, but like, there wouldn't be a direct fill-in, but one position would be filled in because the position has to be filled in. Okay, go ahead and put their hand down. Pro Temp Ludowan.
So, again, the events line is now a total of $1,000. The DEI, the Wellness and Inclusion Director, has a number of event requirements per semester. while I recognize we do have a catering line that is currently 2,500, and that is only for catering. If we are meant to be doing cultural and wellness related events, we're not only going to have food at them, and then we have $1,000 that we're sharing for all executive SGU related events. I simply do not think this is enough for the wellness director to carry out their duties contractually.
How many contracted things do they have to do? Two a semester, okay.
Alrighty. Senator Rose. President Lunaharo.
I want to echo Pro Tem Ludowan's points. In addition, the SGU catering already involves the Professional Development Day, which is mandatory events that we have to do. And on top of that, we'll have to do as well the additional DEI. So just putting that out there. I yield.
CFB.
I'd like to kind of go back to Senator Beckman's point about our clubs being able to help host these events. We have a multicultural student union club. We have the Muslim Student Association. We have the University Christian Faith Club, Fellowship. We have all these clubs that SGU can work with. It's not, sorry, that threw me off, but there's options, and I know that the funding looks very limited within SGU as a whole, but these clubs are still part of SGU. That's still the same student activities fees that can be used and asked to help collab with, because that helps promote the clubs, that helps promote SGU. Like, just because the money isn't in our line directly for DEI programming doesn't mean it can't be accomplished through other means, and means that I would say are, as the CFB president, would prefer happen, so we can get more involvement between our, not yet, anyway, stop, to create a stronger relationship between the SGU, the Horseshoe, and our clubs. I yield.
Chief Justice Wu.
Instead of arguing back and forth, would anyone like to make a motion regarding keeping funding or anything like that? I yield.
Senator Novak.
I will make a motion, but first I just wanted to also state, one of the points was, why didn't I try to do this through a Wellness and Inclusion Committee? I did. I suggested multiple East Asian events that we could do, and they will shut down in favor of doing events such as doing the interfaith event, which I believe was mostly Abrahamic faiths in that. I don't know. I was not able to go to that because of a committee at the time. And I was also, I was shut down for my event ideas for doing East Asian events. So I did try to work through the committee, and I was told no. So I just wanted to put that out there. Second of all, I'd like to make a motion to re-add or re-edit the, I don't know the exact way the property was, but to change GI programming to be 2025, 2026, 2000s, change the dash or null, and then 2026, 2027, 2000s.
Alrighty, we have a motion to re-add the $2,000 that were in the DEI programming line. Is there a second? Second by Pro Temp Ludowan. Moving into discussion of the amendment. Pro Temp Ludowan.
Can I make a motion that's not related to this over it? Or?
It depends on the motion.
Oh. Or?
Yeah, it is above it. You still have the floor.
Motion to push back open forum to 1:50 p.m.
All right, we have a motion to push back open forum to 1:50
p.m.
p.m. Okay. Is there a second? Second by Senator Capo. Is there any discussion for pushing back open forum?
We don't get discussion for that.
Not outlined. Thank you. Okay. Going to voting on pushing back open forum. All those in favor of pushing back open forum? All those opposed? And all those who abstain? That passes 8-1-1. All right, back in discussion of the motion made to re-add in the DI line, starting with Treasurer Weddle.
If I can ask the senator to rescind their motion and to make another motion clarifying where this $2,000 is coming out of. Again, I would very much like to keep a balanced budget. I'm not opposed to necessarily restoring funding for DEI programming, but we really shouldn't be pulling money out of thin air. So insofar as respecting that, I would like that $2,000 to come from somewhere. I yield to Senator Novak.
I rescind my motion, and then I'll make a motion to change outdoor programming from the summary to 83,000, and respectively changing all of that to represent 83,000, and then restoring DI programming to be 2,000.
I believe what she's trying to take from is the reserves. Can we do that?
I mean, you can take from literally any part of the budget. Treasurer Weddle?
Yeah, so to clarify that a little bit, the reserves allocation is not part of our operating budget. It's a reserves designation. So you can reduce it by $2,000, but that doesn't change our overall operating budget. Our overall operating budget is based off our revenue, which is $583,000. So far, we've budgeted $583,000. So if you want to add $2,000 to DEI programming, you have to take